Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Jen Pfeifer, co-director of the National Scientific Council on Adolescence and professor of psychology at the University of Oregon. Just before we start this webinar, I want to acknowledge this is a time of uncertainty for many of us. And regardless of our ages, I'm sure there are lots of strong feelings about the election and the results. We just hope everyone can remain respectful throughout this conversation and recognize the sensitivities that many people feel about this topic. So on October 29th, the week before the election, the National Scientific Council on Adolescence released a note about how elections and youth civic engagement more broadly could provide opportunities for positive adolescent development. And we wanted to share this perspective for several reasons, including because during the election season, there was definitely a real intense focus on the youth vote. Major political parties, both of them wanting to benefit from the youth vote. But when we met together as a council in the early fall, we wanted to balance that interest with inviting everyone to consider, what do youth need in this context? And so today I'm joined by two experts that were also in the room, whom I would like to briefly introduce. So first, Dr. Tony Burrow, who is currently my co-director of the National Scientific Council on Adolescence. He is based at Cornell University, where he is an associate professor in the Department of Human Development, director of the Bronfenbrenner Center for Translational Research, and the Purpose and Identity Processes Laboratory, and the Program for Research on Youth Development and Engagement. And then second, we have Dr. Laura Ray Lake, who is at UCLA, where she is professor of social welfare. And she's also a member of the Vote 16 Research Network and an associate editor at the Journal of Research on Adolescence. Thank you both for joining me today. So I'm really excited to continue the conversation we were having as a council and dive into the ideas we introduced in the note at greater depth. So for webinar attendees, just a few details about the format. We are going to review the key points from the note, but this is a fairly informal conversation. So if you have questions, please feel free to add them through the Q&A function, and I'll try to weave them in whenever possible, and we'll save time at the end as well for additional questions or other contributions from the audience. And as you saw, we're recording this panel discussion, and we'll have it available on the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescent website after this session. So to get us started, as we say in the note, elections are powerful historical moments that can leave lasting impacts on all of us, but they can have special meaning for youth. While only some adolescents are eligible to vote, election seasons can fuel thinking about their own identities and futures, including their roles within their communities and how they can contribute to societal change. Elections are also uncertain, high-stakes events, collective events that can afford rich opportunities for adolescents to meet their core developmental needs. And so even though this recent election is over, chances for civic engagement, especially on a local level, are ongoing and may even feel more urgent and meaningful to some youth. So I feel like today the best place to start is by clarifying what youth civic engagement is. Laura, you study the impact of civic engagement on positive youth development. Can you start us off by explaining what we mean by civic engagement and why it can be so positive for young people?
Sure. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks to everyone for joining us. Civic engagement is defined as actions to address political and social issues, and also related values, attitudes, knowledge, and skills. So young people choose to be civically engaged in a lot of different ways, depending on their interests, their backgrounds, and their opportunities, and the access that they have to different opportunities in their environments. Civic actions can take a lot of different forms. They can be they can range from helping and community service. They can include school-based service learning projects, participation in elections and voting, which is what brings us here today, and also activism and organizing. So civic engagement can be a lot of different things, and not all young people are going to choose the same ways to be civically engaged. I'm really glad that we're here today because I think it's a really timely moment to focus on youth civic engagement. A lot of young people voted in their very first election, and that's a really big moment for young people. Elections and voting is an opportunity for young people to exercise their democratic rights, to use their political voice, and to weigh in on the future of the country. There are a lot of other young people who are not eligible to vote, who are also really engaged around the election. So young people were actively following the news. They were interested in talking about issues that they care about. They were following and learning about the candidates. They were hearing a lot of conversation in their homes, in their communities, and in their schools. And we know that elections are often a heightened time for youth civic engagement. Elections can activate young people's interest in political and social issues in new ways or for the first time. And I think it's important for any election, but especially this one, to just remember that young people don't all think and vote the same way. So, like the rest of the US, there are Trump supporters and there are Harris supporters among youth voters, with major differences by race and gender. There are young people who weren't following it at all, or who didn't have a preference, or who liked neither of the candidates. So there's a lot of different variability that's important to recognize with young people. And in the same way, I think young people are reacting in different ways to the election results, right? So some young people may be feeling excited that their candidate won, or hoping for change in their family's economic circumstances, which was a really big issue driving voters for this election. And I think even with those positive reactions, young people who support Trump may still have questions for the adults in their lives. They may be feeling some uncertainty about the future, and they may also need support in navigating how to express their feelings and opinions in ways that don't alienate or harm other people. There are other young people in our country who may be feeling scared, maybe feeling a lack of control, maybe feeling really high levels of uncertainty about the future. And those fears and anxieties may be especially high for Latino young people who are worried about mass deportation of their family or community members. Research from the last Trump presidency showed that those young people had heightened fears and anxieties during that first Trump presidency, which negatively affected their well-being. We're also seeing heightened mental health concerns from LGBTQ young people since Trump was elected. The Trevor Project, for example, reported a 200% increase in crisis calls from LGBTQ young people after the election. And of course, we saw disturbing and racist text messages about slavery that were anonymously sent to Black young people across the country, which sparked extreme fear and concern. So there's a lot going on right now, but those are just some of my thoughts when I think about civic engagement and the election for young people right now.
Yeah, thanks for helping us understand the real breadth of the breadth that civic engagement can take, and also thinking about it in this current context. I think it's really important. And so you sort of started to raise this and bring up the emotions and the uncertainty. And can we dive further into this idea about the opportunity that elections and that civic engagement can sort of provide to learn to regulate emotions and manage uncertainty, and especially what adults can do to support youth?
Yeah, so I think we do need to look at the election as a really important moment to check in with young people in our lives and support them through whatever they're experiencing. There are a lot of different emotions that range from positive, negative, and all in between. There are uncertainties. And in some cases, like I mentioned, there's targeting and harassment that young people are experiencing in really real ways. So there's some different things that adults can do for young people in this moment. I think first and foremost, we need to authentically listen to and acknowledge the feelings that young people are having. There's a lot of intense feelings of different kinds, and the uncertainty that young people feel is really normal. So adults, as we know, are experiencing a lot of these same things too. It's also important to remember that we might not be experiencing the exact same emotions that the young people in our lives are. They may have different takes. They may have more or less or stronger or different emotions that they're feeling. And so it's important for us to listen openly and, and be open to young people having a different take and different feelings than we are having. When adolescents know that they have somebody who cares about and really validates their feelings, then they're going to feel supported and they're going to feel more likely to open up about their feelings over time. I think also having open conversations with young people about mental health, that's always important. So not just during the election, right? But I think especially for young people from marginalized groups who are feeling threatened and harassed, we as adults who interact with young people in organizations, in schools, in different circumstances and contexts, we need to have that open dialogue about how they are doing in terms of their mental health and realize that certain young people may need more structured forms of support at this time. Adults too, I think we need to be aware of our own emotions and stress levels for adults who are having kind of negative reactions or feeling a lot of uncertainty. A lot of that gets passed down and passed on and seen and felt by the adolescents in our lives. And so that can add anxiety to young people's lives as well. How we manage and cope with our emotions can at the same time be a model for the young people in our lives. So if we can model different ways to positively cope with any negative feelings we're having, then that is a way that adolescents can learn to do the same when they have stressors that come up in their lives. I would just add to that building healthy habits is important all the time, right? But that's another way that we can help young people manage any kind of stress or uncertainty in the ups and downs of life in general. Things like mindfulness exercises, eating well, getting adequate sleep, like these are things that are going to help young people manage stress at any point, including with the election. And then, sorry to continue going on and on, but just a couple more thoughts. Is one, I think adults, we need to recognize that the language that we use and the feelings that we express towards people who are different from us also get heard and seen by adolescents. So whether we're talking about people who are politically different from us or racially different or geographically different, what we are saying and feeling communicates what we value to the young people in our lives. So regardless of our political views, of course, we all want our young people to be compassionate toward others and respectful toward others. And we are models of that compassion and respect. And related to that, we can create spaces for open dialogue and respect for different opinions, even those that differ from ours. And I know personally how hard that can be. Adults, I think all of us need to continually develop our skills related to talking across difference, especially in a society that's feels so politically divided. But that is really important for young people to see and to be able to develop those skills as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I resonate with all of those amazing suggestions. They really apply across the developmental spectrum. So helpful for us as adults to remember all these things for ourselves and to remember that we're modeling these things to the adolescents in our lives, to the children in our lives. And I know that with this note, we were kind of really targeting high school aged adolescents and up, but I actually am really struck by how this is really important too for those middle schoolers who maybe have a little bit less knowledge about civics. You know, they aren't yet in quite as many civics kind of classes, and they're just beginning to learn that. And what they're really picking up on a lot, I think, is the emotions that are being expressed around them. So I think these are really helpful reminders. Do you want to add anything, Tony, or?
I just really appreciated the inclusion, even though we're focused on young people, the inclusion of how a lot of these issues are actually opportunities for adults to practice, to experience, to explore, and not that those need to be separate conversations. They could actually be a moment where families come together to have these conversations and name them. Not just the political process. A lot of our internal emotional regulation is somewhat hidden from even young people in our families or our households or communities. And so this is an opportunity to talk a little bit about how people are processing these things together. How do we work through emotions, whether they're extremely positive or negative, as why are we feeling that? How do we arrive there? And realizing that we're surrounded by people who either share or disagree with us on certain views, but it's an opportunity that itself can be an opportunity for community building and connection, family cohesion moments. So I just appreciate that oftentimes we can unmoor questions and topics of youth development from adult development, but this is an opportunity where they may actually be sort of symbiotic and opportunities to do them together. So I appreciate that point.
Yeah, I love that. Oh.
One other thing that just brings up for me is just thinking about like the different developmental spectrum. So children, I think this applies to young children in certain ways too, who are picking up on emotions that parents and others have and need that support and modeling for coping and expressing emotions. And adolescents, I think, are at this unique space where they can understand the issues as well. So it gets more complex. You can go deeper with adolescents in talking about sort of what's going on in the world, your take on it, and hear their take, because they have their own views that they're developing at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. It really, that transition that you're talking about was very, resonated with me as a parent of a very young adolescent, an 11-year-old, and how how you're pointing to these are chances to learn for adolescents, to learn and to learn about the issues and sort of engage. And we talk in the note about this, about elections and civic engagement being good avenues for learning, for providing young people with a sense of agency. So maybe, Laura, do you want to kind of expand a little on that for us?
Yeah, so absolutely, we know from research that elections are opportunities to spark and grow young people's civic engagement, and also to support them in learning and exercising their agency. So when we use the term agency in research and in academics, we're referring to feeling capable of making a difference through civic action. And so civic engagement is a really powerful way that young people make a lot of meaningful contributions to their community and to their society. It's also a way that young people learn about the world and issues like we were just talking about. And it's an opportunity to take some healthy risks through expressing views that not everybody agrees with, or standing up for what they believe in. So there's a lot of different ways that adults can help young people develop civic agency and take advantage of this post-election moment to do some of these things. I think one is talking to young people about voting and voter registration. If your adolescent is not at voting age, it's not too early really to start this conversation about the importance of voting how you vote, the logistics of registering, and all of that stuff. So that's really valuable knowledge. Also, how do you access reliable information about elections to prepare yourself to vote? So it's not too early to start having these conversations. Some states even allow voter pre-registration at age 16. So if you have a 16-year-old, they can possibly already register to vote to get that preparation started. And there's about 20 states or so that allow 17-year-olds to vote in primary elections when they'll turn 18 on election day. So adolescents need to sort of start thinking about it and prepare ahead of time for the next election. And we know that elections don't just happen every 4 years either. We have other elections as well. We have local elections. So there's a lot of different opportunities besides this, this presidential election to have these conversations and keep young people informed and engaged. I also just wanted to mention, since, as you said, I'm a part of the Vote 16 Research Network, that there are 13 cities across Maryland, California, New Jersey, and Vermont that allow 16-year-olds to vote in school board or local elections. So if you're in one of those places, of course, like the opportunity is even more real for young people. And voting age policies like these are recognizing that young people are capable of understanding issues related to elections and voting, that they're capable of making reasoned and planful and logical decisions like voting, and that voting has a lot of developmental benefits for young people, such as growing their interest and knowledge and engagement, which can, continue and sort of grow over time across the lifespan. So that's kind of in the voting space, but I think beyond voting, like we mentioned, civic engagement is so much more than just voting. One thing that families can do is engage in civic action together. This might be in the political space, like going to political events and rallies, or watching and discussing the news together. It can also be volunteering and doing community service together as a family, which is a way to kind of spark that interest or continue that, that engagement for young people. There's also, I would encourage adults to look for organizations and programs in your community that provide civic learning and action opportunities. It's really important for young people to have a community of peers and also adult support for their civic engagement. And we know from research that involvement in organizations can build young people's skills and agency. So now's a great time to think about how can we continue these conversations, continue this engagement through sort of more local participation. I think also just like we've sort of already said, but elections can really spark young people's political interest and engagement for the first time. And Jen, you were talking about your 11-year-old. I have a 13-year-old daughter who hasn't really shown a lot of interest in politics so far. But during this election, she was also taking US history as an 8th grader. She started asking all kinds of questions about elections, about candidates. She got more and more interested in it as it went on. And so for me as a parent, and I think for us as adults, these are good cues that like young people are interested in this, and we can build off of that interest through more opportunities for engagement and action. So this is kind of a transition point where when they show some interest, maybe they want to take up other opportunities in their communities.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I this brings a couple of things to mind. And, one is a researcher who studies, um, adolescent mental health. I think, if you initially start thinking about the election, and as you started out with kind of this learning related to voting, learning related to civics, and even though the word civic is in civic engagement, this is like such a wide range of opportunity space here that young people can be in, and just across the board for young people to see this opportunity to engage with their communities, and learn about themselves, and learn and experience contexts where they have agency and where they can see these contributions. I think that just we can't underestimate how beneficial that could be, really for their mental health, their development. Sorry, I froze up there for a minute. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Great. So I'm looking here to see if I don't see any questions yet from the chat. If you did join us late, feel free to drop any questions for the speakers in the Q&A function as we go. So I think we did have some interesting statistics just about youth engagement, youth voting and turnout in the last election, that I don't know if you want to just share a little bit about that, and then maybe we can turn to some other points from the note.
Yeah, so I think one caveat, especially for me with the youth, with the statistics, I think of all kinds, including for young people, is that we don't have the final numbers yet. So I think we should all kind of check back in when the numbers become finalized and see what the trends are. But I think so far we see that turnout for young people was down compared to previous elections. So I think that's something that we need to understand more. We know that there's a lot of demographic differences in who young people chose to vote for. So I think overall, young people ages 18 to 29 were more likely to vote for Harris over Trump, but there were some differences. So young men were more likely to vote for Trump. And white youth were more likely to vote for Trump, whereas young women were more likely to support Harris. Non-binary young voters were also more likely, overwhelmingly likely, to support Harris as well. So I think one thing I actually like about sort of reflecting on these different statistics is that it really shows that young people are not all the same. I hear a lot of stereotypes often about young people and civic engagement, that young people are just so liberal. I mean, even I've heard it from conservatives and from liberal adults that young people are just too liberal. They're too different. And I think that's not true. And I think that now with some of these statistics, we start to see that young people have a spectrum of political views. Those seem to come in part from their identities and their experiences too. So I think there's a lot of diversity and a lot to unpack about the youth vote.
Yeah, it's really helpful. And I think, as you're just saying, this idea that, there is this whole breadth of views that young people have, and how this can be related to their identities. I think I'm really excited to hear some of Tony's thoughts maybe on just how civic engagement can be this really amazing context for exploring identity and developing a sense of purpose. As something that we were really excited to share for youth kind of all backgrounds with this note.
Sure, I can absolutely jump in here. And I just want to take a moment and reflect on, express my gratitude for Dr. Ray Lake's comments and remarks. To have an expert talking about this is such an informed I'm learning so much through this conversation. So thank you very much for what's been shared so far. You know, in light of some of the remarks that were made, I guess want to foreground my thoughts with just a comment on who we're talking about. When we talk about youth, that term shows up in our note and in this conversation. And I want to acknowledge that, that term can do some heavy lifting, youth. And it probably benefits us to be specific about who we're talking about with any particular finding or what sort of a plan of action for engaging them as we move forward. And I think a little bit about in the umbrella of the concept of youth, as has been alluded to already, we think about folks who are not yet eligible to vote. So for them, the election that we've been talking about, the election event itself was a TV show they couldn't watch until the polling results start coming in the evening. Yet the consequences of that election are going to matter as much or more for them as they do for the rest of us, so to speak. But to think about that for a second, the weight of what happened last week, no matter where you come out on it, but the weight of it is something that they talk about agency. They didn't necessarily have the chance to control through the action of a vote. And yet that's who we're talking about here. We're also talking about youth who this might have been the first time they got to practice this form of civic engagement of voting. So family members have been shared here, or my son, this was his first election, his chance to actually cast a vote for the candidate of his preference. And you think about this, like the commentary, the rhetoric around this is that democracy's on the line. Like that's a heavy sentiment to walk into a voting booth with by yourself in a space where sometimes the instructions themselves are confusing. Maybe even the wording of amendments are written to be a little confusing to the people casting a ballot. And so with democracy being on the line, you can think about how that might feel is depending if I push up or down on this particular issue, that's going to matter for a lot of people, either in my family, community, or around the society. And of course, under the umbrella of youth might include notions of folks who this isn't their first time voting, whether it's presidential elections or local elections, other forms of participation, volunteerism, so on and so forth. It takes all types under this umbrella of youth, and we want to hold space for all of that in this conversation. And why I think this is really important as I shift into talking about identity and purpose is because what typically happens in the lived experience of youth is that their opportunities are stage gated by chronological age, right? It's a period of severe discontinuity. Every birthday can unlock a new opportunity. At 15 or 16, you get a driver's permit in some places. Then a year later, you can drive by yourself. A couple years later, maybe you can vote. Maybe you can join the military, serve. A couple years later, you can drink. And then a couple years later, you can rent a car. And it goes on and on. So you think about this period of the lifespan as really being characterized as sort of like moments that just a week prior, you couldn't participate and now you can. And to really lean into that notion of discontinuity and in development, I think it reveals that the royal we as a society, don't really do a good job scaffolding all of the learnings and insights that might be helpful to prepare people for those moments. Right, you really wouldn't want the first time you ever to drive a car to be the day you got your license, right? We have driver's ed, we have experiences. If you're like me and you grew up in an agricultural space, I was driving tractors and cars, probably illegally, but I was driving well before I was licensed to drive. So as has been intimated already, I think the notion of practicing democracy, practicing civic engagement, whether it's school boards or conversations about how do ballots work, how are things going to be worded on ballots? And before that moment, you can imagine the safeguards and the preparation that could actually provide, and let them know that it's confusing to all of us, right? No one knows exactly what's happening in a ballot until you actually go cast one. And so thinking about what that's like could be helpful. I will say that what's lost in that, in the lack of scaffolding, is opportunities to engage with youth directly around their own developmental tasks, things like identity formation, exploring and committing to a sense of who you are, committing to exploring versions of a purpose. So not just who you are, but what do you want to do in this world? What can you do? What contributions can you make to push society in a world that you'd prefer, to sort of make more perfect the society that you're actually living in and the people you care and love are living in? those concepts we know are important. The research literature is replete with evidence that constructing a sense of identity and purpose helps us all navigate society, but we find them elusive. How do you talk to a young person about identity, right? How do you explore questions of purpose with young people? Well, an election could be an amazing opportunity to do that. So if we think about a purpose as being sort of this prospective, self-organizing life aim, there's this thing that you intend to go do in the world that is informed by your values, your identities, your motivations, your goals, right? And there's a sort of a center of gravity around those things that are pushing you toward accomplishing something or making a difference in the world around you. That's a heavy topic for a lot of us, despite one's age. But an election or the campaigns leading up to them present a whole host of values, a whole host of visions of what a world or society might look like. That whether it's their own or your own, you could actually hold up and say, what do you think about some of these ideas? This might manifest in this policy. What do you think about that? Does that align with the world that you want to live in? Why or why not? And give us as adults a chance to unpack and disclose a little bit about our own identities. Not just to say the candidate we prefer, but why is that the case? What are they espousing to do in the world that aligns with what we're trying to do in the world? And having those conversations. So I think the election, just like other forms of civic participation that have been alluded to, whether it's helping or volunteering, can be opportunities to actually engage in a more tangible way with these developmental tasks that we find really important. And before I drop, I just want to say, I think when we think about purpose as something that we know as a resource for people who cultivate a sense of purpose in their life, we oftentimes struggle to ask or wonder about, well, where does that come from? Or what are the pathways to purpose? But what's interesting in the research literature is among the unique pathways people may take to forge their own purpose, two seem particularly relevant here in this moment. One of them is a reactive pathway. So compared to people who might proactively construct over longer periods of time the thing that they want to ultimately do in the world, we also know that a sizable number of people arrive at a felt sense of purpose by reacting to some event, oftentimes a social event. And elections can serve as that. So no matter if your candidate or your campaign or preference won in this particular election, what this moment might be for people is a chance to lean further in or provide some headwind to some campaigns that people have heard. So to be sure, this election is starting to create and sort of concretize for people the world that they want to live in and either stand up and push towards or push against that particular reality. So the election and the surrounding consequences of the policies that get implemented can actually create a reactive form of purpose or a kind of activism, if you will. I would also note another pathway is social learning. So a lot of us learn or construct our sense of purpose by watching purposeful agents around us. So I actually saw what it looks like for people to wake up and go canvas, to go campaign for an issue in a state that may be bordering our own or in a county that's over here, to see what it looks like to actually be involved civically. It's not because necessarily the content of that purpose is what I need to absorb, but I look and see what purposeful action really looks like. And so even the notion of civic purpose, which has gotten a lot of traction in literature, but actually wanting to make a difference in the world around or through the means of political or civic sort of tools and resources as a means to achieve your outcomes. I think we're seeing more of that in this moment. I think we'd be remiss to not expect that to be happening right now, as civic purposes and reactionary purposes are being constructed even in this moment. So talking about those with young people as they're happening to us and as they're happening to young people themselves, I think is a wonderful opportunity we should take advantage of.
Yeah, I really love that point. Just, sometimes I remember hearing in years past this idea that sometimes there's this kind of cycle where people aren't maybe paying attention to politics, the decreased rates of engagement in years that are non-presidential elections and things like that. But one of the things, just reflecting on what you said, what I'm hearing you and what I think this moment provides is especially in transitions between major political parties where you can expect a lot of potential for change, is that there may be a lot of opportunities to react, and it's through this engagement in reaction to changes, in the civic space that keep these opportunities open. They're not just this door did not close when the election ended. Do you have any thoughts, Laura, you wanted to share? Oh, sorry, Tony.
Oh, no.
Thank you, Tony, for all those nuggets of insight. And I loved like just making those connections between purpose and this election moment. One of the things I was thinking as you were talking was like how civic engagement is so expansive with all the different ways young people can be engaged. And elections are kind of like these moments, in time. And so after the election's over, and then sort of like, now what? So I think it's sort of like, what are young people interested in, beyond the election and more, one thing we see in the literature is that young people are driven by issues often, less so, they're less connected to political parties than adults are. And so they're more driven by issues. So I just really resonate with what you said about like the reactive pathway to purpose, for example, and how maybe an issue really caught their attention. And this is an opportunity to kind of dive into that and sort of work toward that as a purpose.
And I think that's right. And I think it would be fair to say that for individuals who are driven by issues, that in line with that is where you might see engagement in certain forms of activism as a particular form of activists sort of taking on issues and pushing against those. And I think that is a space where the research literature on purpose can actually be instructive, because we see that activism as a form of civic engagement does correspond with some indicators of well-being and a sense of hope, but it also corresponds with increased symptoms of anxiety or depressive symptoms sometimes, because it's not easy, right? It is not easy to push against a headwind when that headwind might be in the family, it might be in the community. It is by definition sort of pushing against a narrative that may be the popular standing narrative where somebody lives. So I think thinking about that as from the idea that civic engagement, when we're young or younger, in adolescence and emerging adulthood, correspond with a greater sense of purpose in midlife. So if this could be itself a pathway to feeling more purposeful when we're in midlife, then we would want people to be civically engaged when they're younger, but thinking through the kinds of supports that are needed and not sort of stamping out activism as if it's a wholly bad or negative thing. It could be actually the inroad in which young people are finding a voice, finding a group of community that they can participate this in, and trying to understand, why is this issue, not the political party, to your point, why is this issue important to you? What is it revealing about you? What is it? Is there a disclosure of one's identity or intentionality in the world to contribute that you see this as a particular lane? I think it's a wonderful opportunity for conversation for adults who work in proximity to you.
And I just add on to that I love how you framed activism just then, and like as an opportunity, as a developmental opportunity, as an opportunity for developing purpose in different ways. And I think that's a good reframe from a lot of the negative stereotypes in the media, where it's like, oh, these young activists, they're for something that I'm not for, so I don't like that. I want to tamp that down. I think if we could see it like, look at these passionate young people who found an issue that they care about, and they're like out there working on it. And if we could use that lens to like support young people, work with them, talk to them, learn from them, teach them what we know, I think that could be a really productive space for youth and adults.
Absolutely. And I think that that kind of gives, a little, we've talked a fair bit about kind of these sort of maybe family-based opportunities to sort of connect about these issues, connect about values, to model behaviors, to teach and, or have them learn alongside you when you're trying to understand what this amendment might mean, and and all of those kind of activities. One of the things in the note here that I'll sort of wrap up before saving some time for questions is that we said not only are these chances to connect with family, but also peers and the broader community. And I'm wondering if either of you want to share a little bit of your thoughts about these kind of why it's so valuable that they're making these connections, and how civic engagement fosters that. We in particular, the peers, I think, is an interesting element that we haven't touched on so much.
Sure, I can jump in, but of course, Dr. Ray, like, please jump in as well. Let me just say one thing about that is, I'm riffing a little bit on this opportunity to think about community and social capacity and social capital building for young people. Is an opportunity when we think about this is, I think there's been a notable increase in the inclusion or invitation of young people to talk about political possibilities or even policies. And though rarer, I think there have been concerted efforts to center youth voice in these perspectives. I think a real opportunity that we're still lagging behind is inviting young people to participate in community, municipal, civic opportunities that their particular experience is not at the center, but they still could think of it as an opportunity to engage and learn it. So, for example, even critiquing policies that a town or community is engaging in. So what is the cost of this? Financial cost, social capital, how much effort is it? How long is this going to take? These might be opportunities for young people to participate in civic life. And so that it's not only when they are the center of attention that they have a voice that they get to speak to, but they actually could think, well, I'm learning the tools and skills of how do you even critique policies or opportunities that we as a community are making decisions about, and think about all we know from mentorship literature and adult youth relationship literature. The more opportunities young people have to engage directly with adults, the learning opportunities and peers who may disagree with them, those are rich. I mean, we try to scaffold oftentimes experiences that are just positive, but opportunities to actually engage with people who say, you're actually presenting a very different argument than I arrived at using the same data. But let's talk, let's sustain the dialogue with each other. That as a social capacity and opportunity for young people is huge. And civic practices give us a real-time opportunity to bring young people into those conversations, so adults get to hear perspectives of youth and young people get to see how adults are constructing arguments and what counts as evidence or data that we can bring to this conversation to inform the conversation. It would be a wonderful opportunity. So I don't see us doing that a lot, but it seems like we do engage in these conversations, but we oftentimes don't invite young people in until they become the one sort of key stakeholder in the particular issue.
I think that point about elevating youth voice in different spaces and seeing young people as authentic contributors is just so powerful. And a related thing that I was thinking about when you asked the question, Jen, is the really interesting research that shows that young people can be socializing agents for their parents and community members and their peers. So young social change agents and leaders, they have influence on the people around them as well. So we see, for example, that when young people vote for the first time, their parents are more likely to vote, even if they hadn't voted before. So young people can kind of influence or create conversations and change within their families. We also see that peers who have civically engaged friends, they're more likely to be engaged as well. They're also more likely to have better well-being, we found in a recent study, because they feel maybe supported or inspired by their friends who are fighting for social change. So I think it's really important for us to also highlight like just the power of young people in our spaces and how we can learn so much from them as well.
That's really really inspiring. And I think the piece that I felt really would be interesting to add to think about in the peer space here is just that this idea, was something really important that Tony brought up about the, both benefits, but sometimes costs of having a high level of civic engagement and that activism, especially if it's pushing against prevailing headwinds. I'm, some of the things you mentioned make me think that's one space in which doing this together, doing this with peers and finding that sense of connection can be one source of support. We know general, like, peer support and these positive peer relationships really buffer and provide a source of resilience against, these mental health challenges that they, and symptoms they might be experiencing. So I think that this idea of getting involved with your friends in the positive actions, so to support your community, or participating in community activities that might be like with your teams or clubs, or in your neighborhoods and at school, is this really nice way to meet multiple developmental needs at once as well. I don't see, this is an opportunity. If you're here in the webinar and you want to ask any questions, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A. I have one question while we wait here to see if anything else will pop up, which is, I'm wondering, Laura, if you could give any more, concrete ideas of for really non-voting age youth. I'm thinking about the young, early to, 10 to 14. What about that, youth at that age? We gave some, we sprinkled some examples throughout, but those sort of felt, those did feel a lot family-based. Do you have any other concrete examples or ways of non-voting age youth to get involved that maybe our listeners would want to hear about?
Well, I think there's so many different ways, and I think a lot of those are very focused on your local community and the local opportunities and issues or access that are specific to that area. So I would recommend sort of first thinking about the specific young person, like what are they really interested in? Because you want to match opportunities to the interest, right? It kind of goes along with the purpose development. Like you want young people to be invested in something, not just kind of dragging them along to what you're interested in. So I think that's one thing. A lot of young like early adolescents are really interested in the environment, and that's kind of a really concrete issue that they can understand at a very early age. Even elementary school young people, we've seen in research, get really interested in the environment and can sort of envision ways that they can contribute to that issue, whether it's like cleaning up their local neighborhood or getting engaged in conservation kinds of efforts. So I think that's one thing. Some young people are really interested in volunteering. And so the one thing about volunteering is it's hard to find opportunities sometimes for younger kids, like earlier than high school age. But you can do that as a family. So that kind of goes back to those family led and sort of participating together in different volunteering opportunities in your community. And then I think for political engagement, I would recommend looking for organizations that are focused on youth political education. There's a lot of different national organizations, but also local ones as well, depending on your interest and kind of what kind of political organization you're interested in. But a lot of those have youth programs where young people can get exposed to different ideas and perspectives and then engage in action together with other peers that's led by adults. So in LA, we have a ton of sort of these youth-focused, youth-led organizations. They're sometimes connected to schools, but those are great opportunities for young people. And I think young people do need opportunities outside of just what their parents are providing and thinking. They need to get into the community, plugged in, and hear those different perspectives and have access to other action opportunities.
I see one question here. I'm so excited to share a question here that just popped in. I think this will be the last one we have time for, but a listener says, I'm an elected official and a prof teaching youth about youth, and a persistent problem is youth voter turnout and civic political engagement, as we've been confirming in our conversation. They say they tell these students, a lot of you have the causality backwards. You say you don't vote because no one does anything for youth, but it doesn't work that way. If you don't vote, campaigns and politicians won't listen to you. So I guess this isn't so much a question, I should have read to the end before announcing it, but kind of sharing that like there's always a local campaign that needs volunteers. And I think that hits on a lot of themes that we've brought up, especially about local opportunities and looking locally within your communities. If anyone wants to add to that.
I love that. And I do think that you don't have to be a voter also to get involved in local campaigns and door knocking and things like that. So I think elections do bring a lot of opportunities for engagement. I think that the youth voter turnout, we could spend a whole webinar probably talking about that. I think sort of maybe a chicken and egg problem. Because we do know that political campaigns and elected officials don't tend to want to hear what young people think, or they don't direct their issues and campaigns to young people and the issues that they're caring about on the whole. You know, some of them might do a better job than others. And so I think that does leave young people feeling like, well, do I really matter in this case? I think another big issue with voter turnout is registration. I think registration is complicated in some states, cumbersome. I think young people need more access to understanding how to register and more opportunities that are baked into their everyday lives to register. Because we know that a huge majority of registered young people do vote. So registration is that initial hurdle and barrier to getting engaged in voting. So I think we need to address that.
Yeah. Thanks, Laura. Well, I could sit here and talk with the two of you for the rest of my Friday afternoon, but we are out of time. So thank you both so much. And thanks to our attendees for being here today, for being committed to supporting our youth in these times. And just thank you on behalf of the National Scientific Council on Adolescence and the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescent. And as a reminder, you can access this video from this session and lots of other resources on the CDA website later next week sometime. And we'll send all attendees an email with a link to the video of this discussion. If you have any questions or need anything else, you can feel free to contact our communications director, Megan Forder, at meganforder@ucla.edu. Have a great rest of your Friday, everyone, and a really good weekend.